The acrid smell of burning timber filled Sarah Mackenzie's lungs as she clutched her 18-month-old son, Thomas, against her chest. Behind them, the settlement of Cedar Creek was consumed by flames that danced like demons against the Arizona Territory sky. The fire had started in the dry goods store, a kerosene lamp knocked over during the Apache raid, and spread faster than anyone could have imagined. "Run, Sarah, don't look back!" Her husband James's voice still echoed in her mind, even though she'd watched him fall defending their neighbors. The Apache war party had struck at dawn, their painted faces materializing from the desert like mirages made flesh. But this wasn't like the stories she'd heard. There was desperation in their attack, not just aggression. Now, 3 hours later, Sarah stumbled through the Sonoran desert in nothing but her nightgown and James's boots, which were too large for her feet. Thomas whimpered against her shoulder, his small fists tangled in her long auburn hair. The October sun beat down mercilessly, and her water had run out an hour ago. "Mama's here, sweet boy," she whispered, though her voice cracked with exhaustion. "We're going to be fine." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew they were lies. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, red rock formations jutting from the earth like the bones of ancient giants, saguaro cacti standing sentinel under the blazing sky. She had no idea which direction led to the nearest settlement, and with each step her strength ebbed away like water into sand. By midday, Sarah collapsed beside a cluster of barrel cacti, their spines casting thin shadows on the rocky ground. Thomas had stopped crying, which frightened her more than his tears ever could. She pressed her ear to his chest and felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, weak but still there. "Please," she whispered to the vast emptiness around them. "If there's any mercy left in this world." The sun continued its relentless arc across the sky. Sarah's lips cracked and her vision began to blur. She thought of James, his gentle hands teaching her to milk their cow, his laughter when Thomas took his first steps just 2 weeks ago. All of it was ash now. As consciousness slipped away, Sarah thought she heard something, the soft thud of hoofbeats on sandy earth. She forced her eyes open and saw a figure approaching through the heat haze. At first, she thought it might be another mirage, but as the shape drew closer, she could make out the silhouette of a lone rider on horseback. The man was Apache. She could tell by his long black hair and the way he sat his horse, as if they were one creature. He wore buckskin leggings and a shirt of pale deerskin with a red bandana around his forehead. A rifle rested across his lap, but his hands weren't positioned to use it. Sarah wanted to run, to protect Thomas, but her body wouldn't obey. She could only watch as the Apache warrior dismounted and approached them slowly, his dark eyes taking in their condition. He was perhaps 30 years old, with weathered skin and a face marked by old scars, one across his left cheek, another along his jawline. He knelt beside them, and Sarah noticed something unexpected in his expression. Not hostility, but recognition. The kind of look one survivor gives another. "Water," she managed to croak. Without a word, the Apache reached for a gourd hanging from his belt. He lifted Sarah's head gently and allowed her to drink, not too much, not too fast. The water was warm, but tasted like salvation. Then, with careful movements, he helped her give Thomas a few drops. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. The Apache studied her face for a long moment, then glanced toward the smoke still visible on the horizon, all that remained of Cedar Creek. When he looked back at her, something in his expression had shifted. He spoke a few words in Apache, his voice low and measured. Though Sarah didn't understand the language, the tone was clear. He was making a decision. The warrior gathered Thomas in one arm with surprising gentleness, then helped Sarah to her feet. Her legs nearly gave way, but he steadied her. Together they walked to his horse, a sturdy paint mare with intelligent eyes. As he lifted Sarah onto the horse behind Thomas, she caught sight of something that made her heart stop. Tied to the Apache's belt was a scalp of auburn hair, almost exactly the color of her own. But instead of fear, a strange understanding passed between them. They had both lost someone in the violence that morning. The Apache mounted in front of them and spoke a single word that Sarah somehow understood. Nizzo, good, or perhaps safe. As they rode deeper into the desert, away from the smoke and ash of her former life, Sarah felt Thomas's breathing grow stronger against her chest. She didn't know where they were going or what lay ahead, but for the first time since the flames had begun, she felt something other than despair. The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold. Behind them, the last wisps of smoke from Cedar Creek faded into the vast Arizona sky. Ahead lay the unknown, but also, perhaps, the possibility of survival. The Apache warrior guided his horse with subtle shifts of his weight, following paths invisible to Sarah's untrained eye. As the miles passed, she found herself studying the back of his head, wondering about the man who had chosen mercy over vengeance. His hair was adorned with a single eagle feather, and she could see old bullet scars on his arms. "Why?" she whispered, though she knew he probably didn't understand English. To her surprise, he answered without turning around. "Fire takes much, leaves little." His English was halting but clear. "Today, Apache children die too." Sarah closed her eyes, understanding flooding through her. The raid on Cedar Creek hadn't been about conquest. It had been about desperation. Both sides were bleeding. Both sides were losing their children to a war that seemed to have no end. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the clear desert sky, Sarah held Thomas closer and allowed herself to hope. The Apache warrior had saved them, but she sensed this was only the beginning of their story. In the distance, she could see the flickering light of a campfire, and with it, the promise of whatever tomorrow might bring. The Apache camp appeared gradually in the pre-dawn darkness. A collection of wickiups nestled in a natural bowl surrounded by red sandstone walls. Sarah counted perhaps 20 dwellings, their dome-shaped frames covered with brush and hides. Smoke rose from a few small fires, and she could make out figures moving quietly in the shadows. Her rescuer, who had told her his name was Itzar, guided his horse toward the edge of the camp. As they approached, several Apache warriors emerged from the darkness, their faces painted with concern rather than hostility. They spoke rapidly in their native tongue, gesturing towards Sarah and Thomas. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and wearing a dress of soft deerskin approached. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied Sarah with the same measured assessment Itzar had shown hours earlier. She spoke to Itzar, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Grandmother says you stay," Itzar translated. "She is, how you say, medicine woman. Ishtiane, she helps." Sarah dismounted carefully, her legs shaking with exhaustion and relief. Thomas stirred in her arms, but didn't wake. The medicine woman, whom Itzar called grandmother, approached and examined the baby with gentle, experienced hands. She nodded approvingly, then gestured for Sarah to follow her to a wickiup at the center of the camp. Inside, the dwelling was surprisingly spacious. Woven mats covered the ground, and baskets lined the walls, filled with dried plants, roots, and other items Sarah couldn't identify. A small fire burned in the center, its smoke escaping through an opening at the top. Grandmother prepared a bed of soft rabbit fur and gestured for Sarah to lay Thomas down. The baby's breathing was steady now, and his color had improved since drinking the water. The old woman mixed something in a clay bowl, herbs and water, creating a paste that she dabbed carefully on Thomas's cracked lips. "Medicine," Itzar explained from the doorway, "for desert sickness." Sarah watched anxiously as grandmother worked, her weathered hands moving with practiced precision. The medicine woman spoke softly in Apache, and though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the tone was soothing, the universal language of a healer comforting a worried mother. "She says your son will live," Itzar translated. "Apache children know desert. She teaches white children too." Over the next 3 days, Sarah learned the rhythms of the Apache camp. She helped grandmother with her work, grinding mesquite beans into flour and gathering desert plants that the old woman identified as medicinal. The other women watched her with curiosity, but no hostility, occasionally offering shy smiles when she successfully completed a task. Thomas thrived under grandmother's care. The toddler, who had always been timid around strangers, seemed inexplicably drawn to the Apache children. They taught him games with stones and sticks, and his laughter soon echoed through the camp, a sound that brought smiles to even the most stoic warriors' faces. Itzar often sat by their fire in the evenings, helping Sarah understand the words and customs of his people. She learned that the camp was temporary. They moved frequently to avoid both U.S. cavalry patrols and Mexican soldiers who hunted them from the south. "We are Chiricahua," he explained one night, using a stick to draw patterns in the dirt. "We live in these mountains long time, before Spanish, before Mexicans, before—" He paused, searching for the word. "Before us," Sarah finished quietly. He nodded. "Your people take much, push us to mountains, but mountains know us. We know mountains." "What happened to your family?" Sarah asked gently. She had noticed that Itzar slept alone, and there were no children who called him father. His expression grew distant. "Soldiers come to winter camp. 3 years passed. My wife, my son." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Sarah understood the language of loss. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "War takes from all sides," Itzar replied. "But today, no war. Today, we live." On the 4th day, grandmother approached Sarah while she was mending Thomas's torn clothing with sinew and a bone needle the medicine woman had provided. The old woman carried something wrapped in soft leather. "Grandmother says you learn now," Itzar translated as he joined them. "Desert dangerous. You must know how to protect your son." Grandmother unwrapped the leather, revealing a bow unlike any Sarah had seen. It was shorter than the hunting bows she'd known back east, made from what looked like mulberry wood and wrapped with sinew. The string was strong and flexible, crafted from deer tendon. "Apache bow," Itzar explained, "made for horse riding, quick shooting. Grandmother makes this for you." Sarah took the bow with trembling hands. It was lighter than she'd expected, perfectly balanced. "I don't know how—" "I teach," Itzar said simply. "You learn fast or you die. Desert not forgive weakness." They began that afternoon in a small canyon near the camp. Itzar showed her how to hold the bow, how to nock an arrow, how to draw the string with 3 fingers rather than 2. Her first attempts were clumsy. Arrows flew wide or dropped short of their targets. "Feel the bow," Itzar instructed, standing behind her and adjusting her stance. "Not think, feel, bow and arrow, they want to fly true. You just let them." "In my father's house." "Ladies didn't—" Sarah began, then stopped. Her father's house was gone. The world where ladies wore corsets and worried about propriety had burned to ash in Cedar Creek. "How do I feel it?" "Close eyes, feel heartbeat, feel breath. Arrow flies with breath, hits with heartbeat." Sarah closed her eyes and drew the string back, feeling the tension in the wood and sinew. She could hear Thomas laughing somewhere behind her as the Apache children showed him how to weave grass into small baskets. The sound centered her, reminded her why this mattered. She released the string. When she opened her eyes, the arrow had struck the edge of the target, a piece of bark attached to a dead tree. "Better," Itzar said, and Sarah heard approval in his voice. Again. They practiced for hours each day. Sarah's hands blistered, then calloused. Her shoulders ached, but gradually she grew stronger. More importantly, she began to understand what Itzar meant about feeling the bow. It wasn't just a weapon, it was an extension of her will, her determination to protect her son. After a week of training, grandmother approached with another gift. A quiver made from soft deer skin, decorated with intricate beadwork in blues and whites. Inside were a dozen arrows, each one fletched with hawk feathers and tipped with iron points. "She says you ready for real arrows now," Itzar translated. "Practice arrows have no point. These arrows—" he gestured to emphasize his words. "These arrows kill." That evening, as Sarah sat by the fire practicing the bowstring grip Itzar had taught her, Grandmother spoke at length in Apache. Her tone was serious, formal. "She gives you Apache name," Itzar explained. "Dahiska means she who starts again. In Apache way, when person loses everything and builds new life, they get new name. Old life is gone, new life begins." Sarah, now Dahiska, looked down at Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully on the rabbit fur bed. For the first time since the fire, she allowed herself to imagine a future. Not the future she had planned with James in their little cabin, but something different, something forged by necessity and shaped by the harsh beauty of the desert. "What happens now?" she asked Itzar. "Now you learn to live," he replied. "Learn to hunt, learn to hide, learn to fight. Desert tests everyone, but Apache way, we help each other pass the test." As the fire burned low and the camp settled into sleep, Dahiska held her new bow across her lap and listened to the night sounds of the desert, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the whisper of wind through the canyon walls. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since the flames had consumed her old life, she felt something that surprised her. She felt strong. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah Mackenzie had become Dahiska, and the transformation was visible in more than just her name. Her soft hands had grown calloused from the bowstring and rough work of camp life. Her pale skin had bronzed under the desert sun, and her auburn hair, once carefully pinned and styled, now hung in practical braids adorned with small shells that Grandmother had given her. Thomas, whom the Apache children called Bki, his laughter, had adapted to camp life with the remarkable resilience of childhood. He toddled freely among the wiki-ups, chattering in a mixture of English and the Apache words he was rapidly learning. The sight of her son playing with children whose parents had good reason to hate white people never failed to amaze Dahiska. "Today we hunt," Itzar announced as dawn painted the eastern mountains in shades of rose and gold. "Real hunt, not targets." Dahiska felt her stomach tighten with nervous excitement. She had been hitting the bark targets consistently for the past week, but hunting meant tracking, movement, and the reality that her arrows might need to kill to keep her son fed. They rode out together on foot, leaving the horses behind. Itzar explained that hunting in the rocky terrain required silence and patience that horses couldn't provide. Grandmother would watch Thomas with the other children, a responsibility the medicine woman took seriously, knowing that the boy's safety was crucial to his mother's focus. "First lesson," Itzar said as they climbed through a maze of red sandstone formations, "is eyes. See everything. Desert tells stories, which animals pass, when they pass, where they go." He pointed to barely visible scratches in the sandy soil between rocks. To Dahiska, they looked like random marks, but under Itzar's guidance she began to see patterns. The small, cloven prints of javelinas, the delicate tracks of rabbits, the larger, more spread-out paws of a fox. "Read the ground like book," Itzar instructed. "Here, see? Rabbit comes to water before sunrise, still fresh." We follow. They tracked the rabbit's trail through a narrow canyon, Itzar teaching Dahiska to move silently, to test each footstep before putting her full weight down, to breathe quietly through her nose. The bow in her hands felt natural now, an extension of her arms rather than an alien tool. After an hour of careful stalking, Itzar held up his hand. Ahead, in a small clearing between boulders, a cottontail rabbit sat motionless, its large ears swiveling to catch any sound of danger. 40 paces, Itzar whispered. "Easy shot, but remember, this rabbit feeds family. Honor the life you take." Dahiska knocked an arrow with movements that had become second nature. She drew the string back to her cheek, feeling the familiar tension in the wood and sinew. The rabbit was sideways to her, presenting a clear target. She could hear her heartbeat, feel her breath moving in and out. "Feel the bow," she reminded herself. "The arrow wants to fly true." She released the string. The arrow flew in a perfect arc and struck the rabbit cleanly through the chest. The animal dropped instantly. A clean, merciful death. Good, Itzar said simply, but Dahiska could hear the approval in his voice. Very good. As they approached the fallen rabbit, Itzar showed her the Apache way of honoring the animal's sacrifice, a brief prayer spoken in his native tongue, acknowledging the life that would sustain their family. Dahiska found herself unexpectedly moved by the ceremony. In her old life, meat had appeared on the table already prepared, divorced from the reality of death. This felt more honest, more connected to the natural world. They hunted for another 3 hours, taking 2 more rabbits and a small bird that Itzar called a desert quail. Each shot was cleaner than the last, and Dahiska began to understand what the old-timers meant when they talked about becoming one with your weapon. On their way back to camp, they encountered something that made Itzar freeze with tension. Fresh horse tracks in the sandy soil, shod hooves, meaning cavalry or settlers, not Apache ponies. How many? Dahiska whispered, surprised at how easily she had fallen into the habit of caution. Itzar knelt and studied the tracks carefully. 6 horses, maybe 8, moving south toward our winter camp. His expression grew grim. Not good. We moved tonight. They returned to camp quickly but quietly. Itzar spoke rapidly to the other warriors in Apache, and within minutes the entire camp was in motion. Dahiska was amazed at how efficiently the Apache could pack their entire lives into portable bundles. Within an hour, the wickiups were dismantled, and the camp looked as if no one had ever lived there. "Where are we going?" Dahiska asked, as she secured their few possessions to one of the pack horses. "Deeper into mountains," Grandmother replied through Itzar's translation. "Place white soldiers cannot follow, but journey hard. You ready?" Dahiska looked at Thomas, who was riding contentedly in a cradleboard that one of the Apache women had made for him. Her son seemed to treat each new development as an adventure. "I'm ready." The trek into the high country began at sunset and continued through the night. They followed game trails that switchbacked up steep mountainsides, paths so narrow that one wrong step could mean a fatal fall. The Apache moved like ghosts in the darkness, their knowledge of the terrain allowing them to navigate by starlight. Dahiska's legs burned with the effort of the climb, but she kept pace. The bow across her back felt reassuring now, not like a burden, but like a promise. She could provide for her son. She could protect him, if necessary. As dawn broke, they emerged onto a hidden plateau surrounded by towering cliffs. In the center was a natural spring, its water crystal clear and sweet. Ancient pictographs decorated the cliff walls, spiral patterns and animal figures painted by people who had sought refuge here long before the Apache. "Sacred place," Itzar explained as they set up a temporary camp. "Very old, very protected, soldiers never find." That evening, as the camp settled into its new location, Grandmother approached Dahiska with another gift. This time, it was a knife. Not the crude iron blade of a frontier tool, but something altogether different. The handle was carved from deer antler and wrapped with sinew for grip. The blade itself was made from flint, napped to a razor-sharp edge. "Apache knife," Itzar translated as Grandmother spoke. "For close fighting. Bow good for hunting, for distance. But sometimes enemy comes close. Then knife saves life." "I hope I never need it," Dahiska said, accepting the weapon with both hands. "Hope is good," Itzar replied, "but preparation better." Indeed, as if to emphasize his point, one of the young warriors who had been standing watch at the plateau's edge came running into camp. He spoke urgently to the Council of Elders, gesturing toward the trails they had used to reach the plateau. "What is it?" Dahiska asked, though the tension in the camp already told her the answer. "Soldiers follow our trail," Itzar said grimly. "Good trackers. They find the path up mountain." The camp exploded into quiet, efficient activity. The warriors began checking their weapons and preparing defensive positions among the rocks. The women and children were moved toward the back of the plateau, near caves that could provide additional shelter. "How long do we have?" Dahiska asked. "Maybe 2 hours." maybe 3. Itzar was stringing his own bow, testing the tension. They climbed slow, careful, mountain dangerous in dark. Dahiska felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach, but also something else, something that surprised her. Anger. These people had taken her in, fed her son, taught her to survive. They had shown her kindness when they had every reason for hostility. Now soldiers were coming to destroy this refuge, to scatter these families into the desert. "Where do you want me?" she asked, checking her own bowstring. Itzar looked at her with surprise, then respect. "You fight?" "They threaten my son," Dahiska replied, and realized she meant it. "They threaten my family," because that's what they had become, she realized. This ragged band of Apache, living on the margins of a war they hadn't started, had become her family. Thomas played with their children. Grandmother had shown her more kindness than her own mother ever had. Itzar had become... what? Brother? Friend? Something more complex that had no easy name. "You take position in rocks above trail," Itzar decided. "Good archers ground. See everything. Protect children if soldiers break through." As Dahiska took her position among the boulders, overlooking the narrow trail, she thought about the woman she had been just a month ago. Sarah Mackenzie had been a settler's wife, concerned with keeping house and raising her child in the safety of civilization. She had never imagined she could take another human life. But Dahiska was different. Dahiska had been forged in fire and shaped by the unforgiving beauty of the desert. She had learned to hunt, to track, to survive. And if necessary, she would learn to kill. The moon was rising over the eastern mountains when she saw the first glint of metal on the trail below. The soldiers were coming just as Itzar had predicted. Dahiska nocked an arrow and settled in to wait, her breathing steady, her heartbeat calm. In the distance, she could hear Thomas's sleepy laughter as one of the Apache women sang him a lullaby in her native tongue. Whatever happened in the next few hours, Dahiska would make sure that laughter continued. The bow in her hands felt alive, eager. And for the first time since the flames had consumed Cedar Creek, Dahiska felt truly ready for whatever the world might throw at her. The cavalry patrol materialized in the pre-dawn darkness like demons rising from the mountain trails. Dahiska counted 8 soldiers, their blue uniforms dark against the pale stone, their carbines gleaming dully in the starlight. They moved with the confidence of men who believed they held all the advantages. Superior numbers, better weapons, and the backing of a government that saw Apache resistance as little more than an inconvenience to be eliminated. Lieutenant Marcus Cole, a young officer with ambitious eyes and a carefully waxed mustache, raised his hand to halt his men at the edge of the plateau. Behind him, Sergeant Murphy, a grizzled veteran of Indian campaigns, studied the Apache camp with the practiced eye of a hunter. "Sir," Murphy whispered, "something ain't right. They should have posted guards. This feels like..." "A trap?" Cole finished. "Nonsense, Sergeant. These are primitives. They've simply been caught unaware." From her position in the rocks above, Dahiska could see the entire scene unfolding. The soldiers had no idea they were walking into a carefully prepared defensive position. Itzar and his warriors had used the terrain brilliantly, concealed positions among the boulders, overlapping fields of fire, and multiple escape routes for the women and children. Cole raised his voice, speaking in the condescending tone that white men often used when addressing Apache. "By order of the United States Army, you will surrender immediately. Any resistance will be met with deadly force." From somewhere among the rocks, an Apache voice answered in perfect English, "By what right do you come to our sacred place, Indar?" Cole's face flushed with anger. "By right of conquest, savage. This territory belongs to the United States now." "Territory you stole," the voice replied calmly. "Water you poisoned. Children you murdered." Dahiska recognized the voice. It was Itzar, though she couldn't see him from her position. His words carried the weight of loss and years of broken promises. "Enough!" Cole snapped. "Sergeant Murphy, deploy the men. Standard formation, we'll root them out." But Murphy was still studying the rocks, his experienced instincts telling him something his young officer couldn't see. "Sir, I respectfully suggest we—" The first arrow came from the shadows to their left, taking down the soldier on the far right. The man dropped silently, the iron-tipped shaft buried deep in his chest. Before the others could react, two more arrows flew from different positions, and suddenly the soldiers found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. "Take cover!" Murphy shouted, but there was precious little cover on the open ground where Cole had led them. From her elevated position, Dahiska watched the battle unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. The Apache warriors moved like wraiths among the rocks, appearing just long enough to loose an arrow before vanishing again. Their knowledge of the terrain gave them an overwhelming advantage. They could strike from any direction while remaining nearly invisible. Cole, panic rising in his voice, ordered his men to return fire. The sharp crack of carbines echoed off the cliff walls, but the soldiers were shooting at shadows and echoes. Their military training, designed for open battlefield combat, was useless in this kind of guerrilla warfare. "Sir!" one of the soldiers called out. "Henderson's down, Johnson too." Half the patrol was already out of action, and they hadn't even seen their attackers clearly. Cole's ambitious dreams of glory in the Indian Wars were evaporating in the face of Apache tactical superiority. Then, Dahiska saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the soldiers, a young private with fear-wide eyes, had broken from the group and was scrambling up the rocks toward the caves where the women and children were hidden. In his panic, he had inadvertently found the one route that could threaten the non-combatants. Without thinking, Dahiska rose from her concealment and called out, "Stop! There are only women and children back there." The private spun toward her voice, raising his carbine. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across 30 yards of rocky ground. A young white woman, with an Apache bow in her hands, and a terrified soldier who saw only another enemy. "You're white," the private gasped, confusion mixing with relief in his voice. "Ma'am, we're here to rescue you. Get away from these savages." "They're not savages," Dahiska replied, her voice steady despite the carbine pointed at her chest. "They saved my life. They saved my son." "Ma'am, you don't understand. You've been their captive. It ain't your fault if they made you think—" "I understand perfectly," Dahiska interrupted, "and I'm not anyone's captive. She could see the exact moment when the private's relief turned to horror, when he realized that this white woman was standing with the Apache by choice, that she would fight to defend them. "You're one of them," he whispered, and there was something like betrayal in his voice. "Yes," Dahiska said simply, "I am." The private's finger tightened on the trigger, but Dahiska was already moving. The bow came up with fluid grace, and her arrow flew true, striking the soldier in the shoulder and spinning him around. His shot went wide, the bullet spanging off rock somewhere behind her. The private stumbled and fell, clutching his wounded shoulder. He wasn't dead. Dahiska had aimed carefully, choosing mercy over killing, but he was out of the fight. "Please," she said, approaching him cautiously. "Just stay down, don't make me—" The crack of a rifle from below made her duck instinctively. Lieutenant Cole had spotted her and was trying to get a clear shot with his sidearm. His bullets chipped splinters from the rocks around her, forcing her to scramble for better cover. "Traitor!" Cole screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "You'll hang for this." From the shadows came Itzar's voice, calm and deadly. "She will not hang, Indar, but you will die." The fighting continued for another 20 minutes, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Apache controlled the high ground, knew every rock and crevice, and fought with the desperation of people protecting their families. One by one the soldiers fell, some to arrows, others to carefully thrown stones, one to a knife in the back when he tried to find a way around the Apache positions. When the shooting finally stopped, only Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Murphy remained alive, both wounded and trapped behind a fallen boulder. The plateau fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the rocks and the distant sound of Thomas laughing as one of the Apache children showed him how to stack stones. Itzar emerged from concealment, his bow still strung, an arrow nocked but not drawn. Behind him came the other warriors, their faces grim but satisfied. They had protected their families, their sacred place. "Enough blood," Itzar called out to the trapped soldiers. "Go! Tell others what happens when you attack Apache families. We can't just let them go." One of the younger warriors protested in Apache. "They'll bring more soldiers." "Let them come," Itzar replied in English, making sure the soldiers could hear. "Mountains are large. We know how to disappear." Dahiska climbed down from her position, pausing to check on the wounded private. His shoulder was bleeding, but not dangerously. The arrow had passed through the muscle without hitting bone or major blood vessels. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Billy," he gasped. "Billy Patterson, from Ohio." "Listen to me, Billy Patterson from Ohio," Dahiska said, tearing strips from her own clothing to bandage his wound. "When you get back to your fort, you tell them what you saw here. You tell them that the Apache aren't animals. They're people protecting their children, just like you would protect yours." "But they're Indians," Billy protested weakly. "So was the woman who taught me to heal this wound," Dahiska replied. "So are the children who play with my son. Blood is red, no matter what color the skin that holds it." She helped him to his feet and watched as he stumbled toward where Lieutenant Cole and Sergeant Murphy were emerging from cover. The three survivors gathered their dead and began the long, shameful journey back down the mountain trails. As the soldiers disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, Grandmother approached Dahiska with Thomas in her arms. The boy was awake and alert, seemingly untroubled by the violence that had raged around him. "Mama," he said happily, reaching for her with his small arms. Dahiska took her son and held him close, breathing in his familiar scent. Over his head she met Grandmother's eyes. "You did well," the medicine woman said in her careful English. "Daughter of my heart." Itzar approached, his expression unreadable. "You had choice," he said quietly. "Could go with soldiers, return to White World." "This is my world now," Dahiska replied, looking around at the Apache families emerging from the caves and hidden positions. "These are my people. And if more soldiers come, then we'll deal with them too." She shifted Thomas to her hip and picked up her bow from where she had dropped it. "Together!" See, as the sun rose over the eastern mountains, painting the plateau in shades of gold and red, the Apache camp settled back into its rhythms. Children played among the rocks where warriors had hidden. Women resumed their work of gathering and preparing food. The crisis had passed, but more importantly, something had been proven. Dahiska, no longer Sarah Mackenzie, no longer the frightened woman who had fled from burning Cedar Creek, had passed her final test. She had faced a choice between her old world and her new one, between the safety of surrender and the danger of loyalty, and she had chosen to stand with the people who had become her family. That evening, as the camp gathered around the central fire, Grandmother stood and spoke in Apache. Her words were formal, ceremonial, and when she finished, the entire camp erupted in celebration. "What did she say?" Dahiska asked Itzar. "She says you are no longer guest in our camp," he replied, and there was something new in his voice, warmth, pride, perhaps even love. "She says you are daughter of the Chiricahua, sister to our warriors, mother in our tribe. She says the bow chose you, and you chose us." Dahiska looked down at the weapon in her hands, the beautiful Apache bow that Grandmother had crafted specifically for her. It had become more than a tool for hunting or fighting. It had become a symbol of transformation, of the strength that could emerge from loss. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live," Itzar said simply. "We raise children, hunt game, tell stories around fires. We survive, as Apache have always survived. And if the soldiers come again?" Itzar's expression grew serious but not afraid. "Then we fight, as Apache have always fought. But this time, we fight with you beside us." As the fire burned low and the camp settled into sleep, Dahiska sat with Thomas on her lap, teaching him to hold a small practice bow that one of the Apache men had carved for him. Her son's small hands gripped the wood with natural ease, and his eyes shone with concentration as he tried to mimic his mother's movements. In the distance, a coyote howled, the sound echoing off the canyon walls like a song of freedom. Dahiska smiled and pulled Thomas closer, breathing in the clear mountain air. She had fled from fire and found a new life in the desert. She had lost everything and gained a family. She had been given a bow and learned to defend what mattered most. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the darkness, the sacred spring continued its eternal song. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of courage and survival. But tonight, Dahiska was home. The transformation was complete. The frightened settler's wife who had stumbled into the desert was gone forever, replaced by someone stronger, someone who belonged to the vast and beautiful wilderness that stretched endlessly under the western sky. She had become Dahiska, daughter of the Chiricahua, and she would never run from fire again.